Rebuilding carbon-rich agriculture soils is the only real productive, permanent solution to taking excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. She's frustrated that scientists and politicians don't see the same opportunities she sees. This year, Australia will emit just over 600 million tons of carbon. We can sequester 685 million tons of carbon by increasing soil carbon by 0.5% on only 2% of the farms. If we increased it on all of the farms, we could sequester the whole world's emissions of carbon. These two paintings, both called sunflowers, are generally accepted as the finest of several depictions of the thick-stemmed, nodding blooms that Van Gogh made in 1888 and 1889 during his time in Als. The first is now in the collection of the National Gallery in London, and the second is in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. Van Gogh referred to this work as a repetition of the London painting. So there were a lot of scandals around the kind of things they were adding to chocolate in the 19th century. So by the sort of 1870s, 1880s, there are people like Cadbury's saying, our chocolate is absolutely pure. We have this new process, the Van Houten process, which now extracts all this horrible fat that we can use to make eating chocolate. Now we have a pure product. But art historians and curators have long been curious to know how different this repetition is from the first. Should it be considered a copy, an independent artwork, or something in between? An extensive research project conducted over the past 3 years by conservation experts at both the National Gallery and the Van Gogh Museum has concluded that the second painting was not intended as an exact copy of the original example, said Ella Hendricks, a professor of conservation and restoration at the University of Amsterdam, who was the lead researcher on the project. Jack Nicholson, playing the crazed caretaker in The Shining, makes me reach for a blanket. Now a study finds that people we find, well, creepy can actually make us feel colder. The research will be published in the journal Psychological Science. Researchers interviewed 40 college undergraduates. During each interaction, the experimenter was either chummy with the student or very stiff and professional. The investigator also alternated between mimicking students' posture, a signal of rapport, and not doing anything at all. Participants then completed a questionnaire designed to find out how hot or cold they felt. The results showed that the subjects actually felt colder when the investigator acted inappropriately or sent mixed signals. The researchers conjecture that because the brain tries to interpret social cues and purely physical ones simultaneously, people unconsciously associate icy stares and chilly interactions with actual physical coldness. So the next time you have to visit your doctor with the creepy receptionist, bring a sweater. An economist sees the world basically through a typical microeconomic toolkit. That involves things like thinking at the margin, rationality, opportunity cost, trade-offs. Economists, like any other discipline, rules, and its own way of seeing the world. So basically economics, or economists in general, tend to apply microeconomic concepts like that to explain the way humans behave and to make predictions about the future. Finally, we take a look at how to mix and unmix liquids at the flick of a switch. Sandrine tells us more. Oil and water don't usually mix, but the new chemical sensitive to light has been added here to blend them together. When exposed to UV light, the chemical changes its structure and becomes soluble in water. This causes two layers to form with the oil floating on top of the water-chemical combo. This method should be cheaper than the current alternative, which involves using high-energy centrifuges. What is nanotechnology? Well, a report that was put together by a combination of the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering that came out last summer, identifies two topics. Nanoscience is the study of phenomena and the manipulation of materials at atomic, molecular, and macromolecular scales, where properties differ significantly from those at a larger scale. Nanotechnologies are the design, characterization, production and application of structures, devices, and systems by controlling shape and size at the nanometer scale. Financial markets swung wildly yesterday in frenzied trading market by further selling of equities and fears about an unraveling of the global carry trade. At the same time, trading in the European credit markets in London was exceptionally heavy as traders frantically reassessed their appetite for risk, prompting wild swings in the prices of the key derivatives. It was the third day of frenetic activity in the European credit markets, suggesting that equity market swings were prompting a wider repositioning of investors in a host of asset classes. For many years, the favorite horror story about abrupt climate change was that a shift in ocean currents could radically cool Europe's climate. These currents, called the overturning circulation, bring warm water and warm temperatures north from the equator to Europe. Susan Lucier, an oceanographer at Duke University, says scientists have long worried that this ocean circulation could be disrupted. Along the way, we have built unashamedly beautiful buildings, 2 of which have won and been runner-up in the prestigious United Nations World Habitat Award, the first time an Australian building has received that international honor. We rely on older concepts of Australian architecture that are heavily influenced by the bush. All residents have private verandas which allow them to socialize outdoors and also create some defensible space between their bedrooms and public areas. We use a lot of natural or soft materials and build beautiful landscaped gardens. Some years ago, Bjorn Lomborg, a young Danish statistician, published a book called The Skeptical Environmentalist. It became a bestseller and generated a lot of heat. Lomborg was attacked, abused, and accused of all manner of things, not because he denied the fact of global warming, in fact he affirmed it, but because, on his analysis, the devil and, he says, a lot of deviousness was contained in the details presented concerning the size of the problem and what were the most responsible steps to take in response to global warming. In animals, a movement is coordinated by a cluster of neurons in the spinal cord called the central contract pattern generator, CPG. This produces signals that drive muscles to contract rhythmically in a way that produces running or walking, depending on the pattern of pulse. A simple signal from the brain instructs the CPG to switch between modes such as going from a standstill to walking. Lawrence Stephen Lowry RBSRA was an English artist. Many of his drawings and paintings depict Pend Ledbury, Lancashire, where he lived and worked for more than 40 years, and also Salford and its surrounding areas. Lowry is famous for painting scenes of life in the industrial districts of northwest England in the mid-20th century. He developed a distinctive style of painting and is best known for his city landscapes, peopled with human figures often referred to as Matchstick Man. He painted mysterious unpopulated landscapes, brooding portraits, and the unpublished marionette works, which were only found after his death. Now that story's been scotched as only part of contingency planning. But it was a symptom of the dramatic turn of events in South Australia, and it flushed out other remarks from water academics and people like Tim Flannery, indicating that things were really much worse than had been foreshadowed, even earlier this year. So is Adelaide, let alone some whole regions of South Australia, in serious bother? Considering that the vast amount of its drinking water comes from the beleaguered Murray, something many of us outside the state may not have quite realized. Is their predicament something we have to face up to as a nation? All around the world, significant parts of our cultural heritage are by pollution, neglect, carelessness, and greed. In learning the importance of our history, we come to understand the need to protect significant remains from the past so that future generations can come to understand their heritage. Also, malaria is something that is a very complex disease with this complex life cycle. That means that if you're going to eliminate it, you have to be able to target cute parasites and humans. You have to be able to target parasites in the mosquitoes, that mosquito population. And so that requires a lot of resources. It requires really good planning and a health system across all these different levels. And so I think the political capital that you need for that, the educational infrastructure you need for that, the economic resources you need for that are quite a challenge. There are some common reasons to explain why early civilizations developed in different places and different times around the world. Each ancient civilization that has been discovered developed in places where there was a reliable water supply, usually on the banks of major rivers, and where the soil was fertile enough to grow crops. We can gain an accurate knowledge of the past only if we know the age of the different sources being investigated. Without this information, historians and archaeologists could not be sure of the order in which different areas were settled, used, and abandoned. They would not always be sure if a particular object was real or forgery.